Most people think those who love staying at home are just lazy, antisocial, or avoiding life. But that's not what's actually happening. The truth is far more strategic. When someone truly loves being alone at home, they aren't running away from the world. They're quietly learning how to control it. Because the moment you stop needing constant stimulation, constant validation, and constant company, you become dangerous in a world built on dependence. Think about it. Society trains you to always be available, at work, in relationships, online. Everyone's competing for visibility, attention, approval. But the person who stays home by choice has stepped out of that game entirely. They've refused to let the world dictate their rhythm. And that, in Machiavellian terms, is the beginning of power. Because Machiavelli understood something most people still don't, whoever can remain still while others panic wins. And the home is where that stillness is forged. The homebody's mind becomes a fortress. While others rush around trying to be seen, they're building depth. While others scatter their energy, they're consolidating it. Isolation sharpens their focus, but it also filters their desires. You begin to see what actually matters when there's no crowd telling you what should. You stop chasing what looks valuable and start recognizing what feels valuable. That's why Machiavellian thinkers often appear detached. They're not cold, they're selective. They don't isolate because they hate people. They isolate because they hate noise. It's funny, isn't it? The world celebrates social butterflies, yet history remembers the strategists, the thinkers, the ones who disappeared for a while and came back with clarity sharp enough to reshape everything. The truth is, when you're constantly around others, your personality fragments. Every environment demands a version of you, and slowly you forget what your own mind sounds like. But when you spend enough time alone, the echoes fade, and your original voice gets louder. And once you hear it clearly, you can't unhear it. Machiavelli would call this the cultivation of inner sovereignty, the power to think and act independent of social influence. And there's nothing society fears more than a person who doesn't need it, because control only works on those who crave inclusion. The one who is content being alone at home is paradoxically the freest person alive. Their comfort in solitude is a threat. You can't tempt them with belonging, shame them with loneliness, or manipulate them through approval. Their silence becomes a weapon. But let's be honest, loving to stay home isn't always born from strength. Sometimes it begins as a wound. Maybe you got tired of disappointing friendships. Maybe you grew weary of shallow interactions, fake smiles, and forced enthusiasm. Maybe every time you went out, you came home feeling emptier than before. And slowly, your home became the only place that didn't drain you. But that's where the transformation begins. What starts as retreat can evolve into resistance. Your home becomes not a hiding place, but a headquarters. And this is where Machiavellian psychology steps in. He believed all strength begins in self-sufficiency. Dependency, emotional or social, is a weakness easily exploited. If you always need to be surrounded by others to feel alive, you're at their mercy. You give them the power to validate your existence. But if you can find fulfillment in solitude, the power dynamic reverses. Now you can engage with people because you choose to, not because you have to. That's not antisocial, that's sovereign. It's why many people misunderstand those who love staying home. They assume isolation equals loneliness. But that's only true when solitude is imposed, not chosen. Chosen solitude is control. It's the conscious decision to preserve your energy and direct it towards something meaningful, rather than scattering it across 1,000 trivial exchanges. When you stay home intentionally, you're not avoiding life, you're curating it. Inside that quiet space, the mind learns patience. It learns to watch without reacting, to plan without broadcasting. You begin to develop what Machiavelli valued most: unpredictability. The world can't manipulate what it can't read. When you're constantly visible, always posting, always speaking, always explaining, You give others a map of your weaknesses. But when you withdraw into silence, that map disappears. You become an enigma, and power lives in mystery. This is why so many of history's sharpest minds were reclusive by nature. Isolation gave them insulation from the mediocrity of crowds, the contagion of groupthink, and the fragility of public opinion. They learned to think in peace before acting in precision. The average person confuses constant movement with progress, but the strategist understands. Movement without direction is chaos. Staying home gives you the stillness to aim before you strike. And here's what most people will never understand. Being home for long periods forces you to confront yourself. There's no one else to distract you. The uncomfortable thoughts surface. The insecurities, the regrets, the unresolved emotions, they all come up. And while most people run from that discomfort by chasing company, the person who stays home faces it head-on. They learn emotional control, not because they suppress feelings, but because they've spent enough time with them to stop being afraid. Machiavelli would call that the taming of the inner court, the mastery of one's own mind before attempting to master others. That's the real power of staying home. It's not comfort, it's confrontation. It's where you learn who you are when no one's watching, where you learn to act without applause. Every moment of solitude becomes training for independence. And once you've mastered the art of being content in your own company, every interaction becomes a choice rather than a need. You can enter any room and remain unshaken because you no longer seek to be completed by it. The irony is, people who love staying home are often labeled as out of touch, when in reality, they're more in touch with reality than anyone else. They see how people scramble for validation, how easily emotions are manipulated in social spaces, and they choose not to participate in that madness. They conserve their presence like a scarce resource, knowing that attention given freely is power surrendered. That's why when they do show up, it matters. Their presence carries weight precisely because it's rare. This is the paradox Machiavelli would admire most. Invisibility as influence. When you're always visible, people take you for granted. But when you disappear, they start to wonder. Curiosity becomes your silent ally. You become the person whose absence speaks louder than others' noise. And that's what people who love staying at home instinctively understand. They've realized that silence, when controlled, is one of the purest forms of dominance. But don't mistake their quiet for weakness. Stillness is not stagnation, it's strategy. They're watching, learning, calculating. While others waste time performing their lives for approval, they're constructing theirs in private. They understand that true transformation is like building a weapon. It must be forged in secret. The fewer eyes watching, the fewer hands interfering. They're not missing out on life. They're preparing for it on their own terms. And when they do step out, the world feels different. Their words are sharper, their energy calmer, their eyes more observant. They've learned to see through pretense. That's the Machiavellian mind born from solitude. It studies human nature without being consumed by it. The quiet observer is always more powerful than the loud participant, because understanding people doesn't require constant interaction. It requires distance. You learn more about the world by stepping away from it than by drowning in it. Because when you're always inside the noise, you can't hear the patterns beneath it. The one who stays home learns to detect motives in speech, insecurity in confidence, and emptiness behind ambition. Solitude turns you into a psychological analyst of human behavior, not through books, but through observation sharpened by absence. And maybe that's what makes people uncomfortable with those who love staying home. They can't read them. They can't predict them. They can't manipulate them using the usual tricks of guilt or flattery. Because when you've spent enough time alone, you start seeing through the mechanics of social control. You realize how people use presence to impose influence, and you simply choose not to play. And when you reach that point, when solitude no longer feels like withdrawal, but revelation, you start noticing how predictable everyone else has become. People talk, act, and even rebel in patterns. Their individuality is just a rotation of borrowed scripts. But when you've been home long enough to disconnect from all that noise, you start to see through it. You see how the same motives repeat themselves across different faces. The hunger for validation, the fear of being forgotten, the desperate need to matter in the eyes of others. Once you recognize that pattern, it stops controlling you. This is why Machiavelli believed the most dangerous man is not the one who commands armies, but the one who controls his perception. And perception is forged in solitude. When you're home, detached from external influence, you begin to realize how easily people are steered. You can sense manipulation in tone, guilt in generosity, and power moves hidden behind kindness. Isolation rewires your perception. It turns the ordinary into data. Every silence, every delay, every glance becomes information. And information, in Machiavellian psychology, is the seed of control. People who love staying home live in a world of subtlety. They operate below the surface, where everything others miss becomes visible. The way someone interrupts you mid-sentence, the hesitation before they agree, the tone shift when you talk about your goals. These things tell stories louder than words, but you only start noticing them when your mind is quiet enough to listen. And that quietness doesn't come from being away from people. It comes from mastering the noise inside you. That's what the world misunderstands. Staying home doesn't isolate you from people. It isolates you from their illusions. There's a reason you start losing interest in most conversations after you've spent time alone. You begin to see how shallow most of them are. Not because people are dull, but because their minds are always half somewhere else, on how they're perceived, on what to say next, on the invisible scoreboard of social status. The person who loves staying home has escaped that treadmill. Their self-worth no longer depends on external confirmation, and once that happens, they start choosing relationships differently. They no longer chase connections, they evaluate them. Their standards rise, not from arrogance, but from awareness. That's the psychological shift Machiavelli would call the separation of necessity and desire. When you no longer need social approval, you can desire it strategically. You can choose to engage for purpose, not out of compulsion. That's what makes a person quietly powerful in social dynamics. They don't react, they respond. They don't seek attention, they allocate it. They're not driven by FOMO, they use it against others. Because once you understand how addicted people are to being seen, you can manipulate visibility itself. The irony is, the people who can't stay home for a day are the easiest to control. Offer them an audience, and they'll dance. Offer them silence, and they'll crumble. They don't fear rejection, they fear invisibility, and in that fear lies their leash. But those who love staying home, they've broken that leash entirely. You can't scare someone with loneliness when they've made peace with it. You can't punish them with silence when they thrive in it. Their stability comes from within, and that makes them immune to most psychological games. That's why isolation becomes a test of inner structure. When you remove external feedback, your true character surfaces. You start noticing whether you can sustain your own company or not. Most people discover that their thoughts are too loud, their anxieties too restless, their mind too dependent on distractions. But those who learn to sit through that initial discomfort evolve. They stop fighting their thoughts and start directing them. They learn to use solitude as a forge, not a prison. Every hour alone becomes a negotiation between who you are and who you could become. And over time, something strange happens. You stop feeling like you're missing out. The idea of missing out starts to sound childish, because once your inner world becomes richer than any external one, you stop craving escape. You don't need a crowd to feel alive. You don't need noise to feel important. Your imagination, your ideas, your self-reflection, they fill the silence in ways small talk never could. You stop chasing pleasure. and start constructing peace. And peace, once tasted, ruins you for anything less. That's what people don't realize. Staying home isn't about isolation, it's about insulation. You're protecting your mind from unnecessary exposure, preserving your focus for what actually matters. Machiavelli would say that every leader must know when to retreat behind walls, not out of fear, but to strengthen control. The homebody does the same, not politically, but psychologically. Their retreat isn't weakness, it's consolidation. They're gathering insight, refining strategy, building mental armor, and by the time they re-emerge, they're 10 steps ahead of everyone still running in circles. But make no mistake, loving solitude doesn't mean hating people. It just means you've stopped romanticizing them. You no longer project your hopes onto others. You see people for what they are: beautiful, flawed, self-interested, inconsistent, and you interact accordingly. You don't expect loyalty from strangers or depth from acquaintances. You appreciate goodness, but you don't depend on it. That realism is pure Machiavellian clarity. It doesn't make you cynical, it makes you effective. And that's the quiet genius of those who stay home. They turn what society calls isolation into discipline. While others are overstimulated, they're focused. While others seek escape, they're building patience. They know that most people crumble not because of failure, but because they never learn to be alone with their thoughts. Every impulsive decision, every desperate relationship, every burnout, it all comes from the inability to sit in stillness. The homebody, meanwhile, has mastered it. They've turned what feels unbearable to others into their strongest habit. Even time itself starts behaving differently in solitude. Without social noise marking your hours, your days stretch. You begin to feel your life in longer breaths instead of scattered fragments. You start recognizing how much energy you were wasting, trying to maintain appearances, trying to be understood, trying to fit in. And suddenly, that energy becomes available again for creation, learning, or simply peace. You begin living in alignment instead of performance. This is the real revolution hidden inside staying home. You stop existing for others. You stop building your self-image based on mirrors that distort you. You stop chasing applause from people who barely understand themselves. And that's where your true identity begins. Not in rebellion, not in withdrawal, but in realization. You realize you were never meant to blend in. You were meant to observe, to analyze, to act when it counts. The person who loves staying home is not passive. They're just patient. Because while the world is busy reacting, they're preparing. They're studying human nature, mastering their craft, sharpening their mind. And when they finally step out, it's not to compete, it's to conquer. Quietly, strategically, decisively. Just as Machiavelli would advise. Appear when your absence has been felt long enough, and your presence will command attention without you asking for it. And by then, everything has changed. The world outside has kept spinning, unaware that you were evolving in silence. You return with a mind sharper than before, but calmer too. You don't rush to prove anything, because you've seen what that hunger for validation does to people. It consumes them. They spend their entire lives trying to be noticed by others who barely notice themselves. But when you've lived in solitude long enough, you stop needing to be seen. You start craving understanding instead, and you quickly realize that most people aren't even capable of giving that. So you become your own mirror. This is where solitude becomes power in its purest form, self-recognition. Because the moment you truly see yourself, your nature, your motives, your shadows, nobody can use them against you. People are controlled through their blind spots, their insecurities, their unacknowledged desires, their need to appear good. But when you've faced all of that in silence, you stop being vulnerable to manipulation. You no longer need to defend your image. You've already seen the worst parts of yourself and made peace with them. That's why Machiavelli wrote about understanding human nature before trying to control it. It applies inward first. And there's another layer to this psychology that's rarely talked about. People who love staying home often have a high sensitivity to chaos. They don't hate the world, they just feel it too strongly. Every conversation, every environment, every piece of social tension, it all leaves a trace in their mind. That's why their withdrawal isn't cowardice, it's calibration. They're filtering out what isn't necessary so they can focus on what actually matters. The home becomes a laboratory of observation where they can dissect emotions, study reactions, analyze motives. It's not laziness, it's intelligence turned inward. When you understand this, you start realizing how misjudged solitude really is. Society glorifies external ambition, but ignores internal mastery. Everyone wants to build something out there before building something in here. But the ones who love staying home invert that process. They become powerful internally first, and only then project that power outward. That's why when they speak, people listen. There's weight behind their words, because silence was their training ground. Even their relationships change. They stop chasing connections that drain them. They stop confusing attention with affection. They understand that most people don't actually connect. They exchange emotional favors. You listen to me, I'll like you back. You validate me, I'll stay around. But those who found peace at home don't play those games anymore. Their affection becomes selective, intentional, and unshakable. When they give it, it means something. And when they withdraw it, it's final. That's what makes them so powerful in human dynamics. They don't need anyone enough to lie. Machiavelli would call that psychological leverage. When you're the one who can walk away easily, you control the terms of every interaction. The person desperate for company will always yield, but the one content in solitude can never be cornered. That's the kind of quiet power that terrifies people. They can't guilt you into compliance, can't flatter you into submission, can't shame you into chasing what doesn't serve you. Your home becomes not a space, but a symbol of self-command. And perhaps that's why staying home feels so peaceful, yet so defiant. You're rejecting the unspoken rule that to be valuable, you must be visible. You're no longer participating in the performance of social worth. You're simply existing as yourself and doing it unapologetically. It's radical because the modern world profits off restlessness. It needs you constantly consuming, comparing, competing. But when you stay home, you're not just saving energy, you're denying that entire system its grip on your psyche. It's no coincidence that those who love solitude tend to have a kind of calm that others can't fake. There's a groundedness in them, like they're rooted somewhere deep that chaos can't reach. They don't panic easily, they don't overreact. They've lived long enough in quiet to realize that most crises resolve themselves if you simply don't feed them energy. That's a Machiavellian kind of wisdom. Do less, but do it decisively. While everyone else exhausts themselves trying to look in control, you maintain control by doing nothing until it's time. But that doesn't mean isolation turns you emotionless. Quite the opposite. People who love staying home feel deeply, but selectively. They've learned to contain their emotions instead of broadcasting them. When they do express something, it carries impact because it's deliberate. They've seen how emotional impulsiveness weakens people, how every outburst becomes ammunition in someone else's hands. So they mastered restraint. They used their emotions strategically, like a sword drawn only when necessary. Their quiet becomes their armor, their stillness their advantage. And the beauty of this transformation is that it's invisible. Nobody sees it happening. You can't post solitude. You can't show peace on a feed. It's an achievement that doesn't demand applause, and that's what makes it sacred. You evolve in ways no one can measure. Your patience deepens. Your judgment sharpens. Your ambitions refine. You start wanting different things. Less noise, fewer people, higher quality everything. And that shift alone separates you from the majority who chase quantity over depth. But here's the final paradox. The more you enjoy staying home, the less you actually need to hide from the world. You can enter it without losing yourself. You can socialize without being drained, because you're no longer performing, you're simply observing. You don't get pulled into other people's chaos. You watch it from a distance, detached but aware. And when you speak, it's not to fill silence, but to shape it. That's what Machiavelli meant by mastering appearances. The person who knows how to control their visibility controls their power. So if you find yourself loving solitude, don't doubt it. It's not laziness. It's not avoidance. It's a stage of evolution most people never reach. You're learning to govern yourself in a way few ever do. You're building patience in a world that worships urgency. You're learning to see instead of just look, to feel without reacting, to move without noise. And that's not isolation, that's mastery. Because the person who can sit alone, content, with no one to impress, no distraction to numb them, and no external noise to fill the silence, that person is no longer just living at home. They've built a kingdom within it.